Jacob Harlan had always been a man of few words. He lived far from the nearest town, on a wide stretch of land that seemed to go on forever. The open plains of New Mexico were both his comfort and his prison, quiet, vast, and often lonely. Every morning he woke before the sun, made a cup of strong coffee, and stepped outside to look at the rising light touching the faraway hills. The wind smelled of dust and sagebrush. This was his world: the ranch, the cattle, the fences, the endless sky, and one small wooden house that held his whole heart, his daughter. Emily, Jacob's wife, Sarah, had passed away the same night Emily was born. It was a loss so deep that Jacob never truly spoke of it again. He had loved Sarah with the steady devotion of a man who didn't know how to love in half measures. When she died, something quiet in him broke, but when he first held the baby in his arms, he made a silent promise that no matter what, he would raise her with all the care he had left in him. The years went by slowly, but not without meaning. Emily grew up chasing butterflies across the fields, helping her father feed the horses and sitting beside him at the kitchen table during long, silent suppers. She had her mother's blue eyes and her father's calm spirit, but sometimes, especially when the wind howled through the canyon, she would look out the window and ask softly, "Papa, what was Mama like?" Each time Jacob's throat tightened. He would set down his coffee cup and look into the fire instead of at his daughter. "She was kind," he'd say, "and she loved you very much." That was all he could manage. Emily would nod, though she didn't remember her mother. Sometimes she'd take the small locket that had belonged to Sarah, the only thing left of her, and hold it tight as if it carried warmth. Their days followed a steady rhythm. Mornings were for work, afternoons for fixing fences, and evenings for reading by lamplight. Jacob had taught Emily to read from the same Bible his own father once used. She read aloud, her soft voice filling the empty spaces of the house. It made the place feel alive. Still, no matter how much they filled their days, Jacob could see that something was missing in her world. The gentle touch of a mother's hand, the kind of comfort only a woman's heart could offer. He tried his best, but there were times when her loneliness mirrored his own, and neither of them knew how to bridge it. Sometimes neighbors would stop by. Old Mr. and Mrs. Wilkins from the next ranch over would bring pies or supplies. Mrs. Wilkins always fussed over Emily's hair, brushing it gently and tying it with bright ribbons. "This child needs a woman's care, Jacob," she'd say kindly. "She's growing fast." Jacob would nod but say nothing. The truth of it burned quietly inside him. The land around them was harsh but beautiful. The sky stretched wider than imagination, changing colors through the day. Golden at dawn, blazing at noon, and painted pink and purple by sunset. In spring, wildflowers dotted the meadows, and Emily would pick handfuls to place on the table. In winter, snow sometimes dusted the mountains in the distance, though it rarely reached their valley. The sound of cattle bells, the creak of the windmill, the soft hum of the breeze through the cottonwoods, these were the sounds of their life. Jacob was respected among the few ranchers who lived in that area. He was honest, worked hard, and kept to himself. People trusted his word, and often came to him for advice about cattle or land, yet few really knew him. Behind his quiet eyes lived a man who had endured great loss and built walls around his heart to survive it. On Sundays, he and Emily would ride into the small town of Silver Creek about 10 miles away. They'd attend the little white church at the edge of the settlement, then stop by the general store to buy flour, sugar, or cloth. People smiled kindly at Emily. Everyone in town knew her as Jacob's girl. Sometimes women would whisper about how brave Jacob was to raise her alone, but others said it was strange, even dangerous, for a man to live that isolated. Jacob didn't pay much attention. His life was his own, and he was content with that, or at least that's what he told himself. Emily, however, saw the world differently. She was curious and tender-hearted. She loved animals and often rescued injured birds or stray dogs that wandered near the ranch. Her laughter could turn the gloomiest morning bright again. For Jacob, she was the reason he kept going, the one light in a life that had known too much silence. But he could see she longed for things he couldn't give her: friendship, warmth, and the kind of stories a mother would tell at bedtime. One night, after Emily had gone to bed, Jacob sat on the porch beneath the stars. The air was cool and still. He looked at the glowing windows of the house and thought about her question. What was Mama like? It haunted him. He realized that his daughter didn't just need to know who her mother was. She needed someone to be that presence in her life, someone who could teach her the things he could not. He whispered under his breath as if to the night, "My daughter needs a mother." The words startled him. He hadn't meant to say them aloud, but they were true, and once spoken, they couldn't be taken back. Still, he didn't know what to do about it. He wasn't the kind of man who courted women or sought companionship. His world was made of dust and fences, not dances or promises. He didn't even know where to begin. Yet the thought lingered, quiet but constant, like a small flame refusing to die out. Weeks passed. The ranch work grew harder as the weather changed. Some days the cattle wandered too far, and Jacob had to ride out into the rough country to find them. Emily stayed behind, helping as best she could, tending to the chickens, gathering eggs, sweeping the porch, humming to herself. She had a sweetness about her that softened even the hardest days. Then one afternoon, while mending a broken fence, Jacob saw storm clouds gathering in the distance. He could smell rain and hear thunder echoing faintly from the canyons. He saddled his horse and rode out to bring in the strays before the storm hit. The wind picked up, tossing dust into his face. It was a long, rough ride across uneven ground, but he was used to it. He found the cattle near the canyon rim and began driving them back toward home when he noticed something unusual: footprints in the dirt. Small, light, and scattered, not from boots but bare feet. He dismounted and crouched down to study them. They weren't fresh, but they weren't old either. Someone had passed through here recently, maybe a day or two before. He followed the tracks a short way until they led toward the canyon, where the ground dipped into shadows. There he saw something move. For a moment he thought it was an animal, but then he realized it was a person, or rather several, figures, faint against the rocks trying to stay hidden. Jacob froze. His first thought was caution. In those years, the land was tense with mistrust between settlers and the Apache people who had lived there long before the ranches came. But he didn't feel fear, only a deep curiosity and an old human concern. Whoever they were, they looked weak, like they hadn't eaten in days. He turned his horse toward home, the wind now carrying the first drops of rain. He didn't say a word to Emily that night, but as he sat by the fire after supper, he couldn't shake the image of those distant shapes in the canyon. Something in his heart stirred, a quiet pull between duty and compassion. He didn't know it yet, but that moment, that simple choice to look twice instead of turning away, would change everything. It would bring new life to his lonely home, test the limits of his courage, and teach him the meaning of family in ways he had never imagined. For now, though, he simply tucked Emily into bed, watched her drift to sleep, and whispered again to the quiet night outside the window, "My daughter needs a mother." And somewhere beyond the hills, under the same sky, 3 women were praying for mercy. The next morning, the air was cool and heavy with the smell of wet earth. The storm had passed during the night, leaving puddles that reflected the pale blue sky. Jacob saddled his horse just after sunrise. He told Emily he needed to check on the cattle again near the canyon before the ground dried too much. She smiled and handed him a small bundle of biscuits she had baked the night before. "Don't forget breakfast, Papa," she said with a grin. He smiled back, touched by her care. "Thank you, sweetheart. I'll be back before sundown." Kleine rode out across the open land, the sound of the horses' hooves echoing softly through the quiet. The grass was damp, shining with dew. As he approached the canyon, the wind whispered through the rocks, carrying the faint smell of juniper and dust. Jacob guided his horse carefully along the ridge. He was thinking about the tracks he had seen the day before, the small bare footprints that didn't belong to anyone he knew. The thought had stayed with him all night. Something inside him had urged him to look again. He dismounted and began walking, leading his horse slowly behind him. The canyon stretched out below, its walls glowing gold in the morning sun. It was a peaceful sight, yet something about it felt different today. The air seemed still, as if holding its breath. Then he saw them. At first, they were only shadows between the rocks. 3 figures crouched near a dry riverbed. He stopped where he was, careful not to startle them. His eyes adjusted to the light, and he could see more clearly now. They were women, 3 of them, thin, tired, and dressed in worn clothes. One was older, her hair streaked with gray. Another looked hardly older than Jacob's daughter, and the third was somewhere in between. They hadn't noticed him yet. They were gathered close together trying to share what looked like a small piece of dried bread. The youngest of them coughed softly, and the older woman placed a hand on her back, comforting her in silence. Jacob's heart tightened. They looked, weak and frightened too, not in a wild way, but in the quiet, cautious way of people who had been running for too long. He stepped forward slowly, raising one hand to show he meant no harm. "You all right there?" he called out gently. His voice echoed off the rocks. All three women froze. The older one turned her head sharply, her dark eyes watching him with suspicion and fear. She said something in a language Jacob didn't understand. The other two pressed closer to her, one holding onto the other's arm for support. Jacob stopped several paces away. He could see now that they were Apache women. He had seen others before, though rarely up close. He knew that life for them had grown difficult. Many had been pushed from their homes, wandering across the land in search of safety. He had heard stories, but he had never expected those stories to appear in front of him, hungry and alone. He took a slow breath. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said quietly. "You look like you could use some food and water." The women said nothing. The older one stood up, steady but wary. Her face was calm, though her eyes stayed fixed on him, alert to every move. Jacob slowly unwrapped the biscuits Emily had packed for him. He took one, broke it in half, and held it out toward them. "Here," he said softly. "You can take it." For a long moment, no one moved. Then the youngest woman, the one who had been coughing, looked up at the older one as if asking for permission. The older woman gave a slight nod, and the young one stepped forward timidly. She reached out, her fingers trembling slightly, and took the biscuit. She looked at Jacob for just a second, then stepped back quickly, clutching the food in her hands. Jacob waited as she broke it into smaller pieces and shared it with the others. They ate slowly, carefully, as if afraid it might disappear. He could see how thin they were, how their faces were drawn from hunger and exhaustion. He felt a deep ache in his chest. These weren't enemies. These were people, tired, lost, and frightened. After a while, the older woman looked back at him and spoke again. Her voice was low and steady, but the words were unfamiliar. Still, he could hear the tone, cautious but not angry. Jacob pointed toward the canteen at his side, then gestured as if drinking. She nodded slightly. He placed the canteen on a rock between them and stepped back. She approached slowly, picked it up, and handed it first to the younger women before taking a sip herself. Jacob could tell they had been through something hard, though he didn't know what. He didn't ask. It wasn't his place. The sun climbed higher, and the air grew warmer. Jacob shaded his eyes and looked around. The land was open. Too open. If a patrol or travelers passed through, they would see these women easily. That could bring trouble for everyone. He turned back toward them and said quietly, "You can't stay out here, it's not safe." The older woman didn't answer, but her eyes followed his hand as he pointed toward the horizon where his ranch lay miles away. "There's food. Water," he said slowly, trying to make his meaning clear. "You can rest there." The youngest looked uncertain, glancing between Jacob and the older woman. The middle one, perhaps the sister or daughter of the eldest, spoke a few words softly, her voice like a whisper. The older woman considered for a long moment. Finally, she gave a small nod. Jacob let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "All right then," he said gently. "Come on." He led his horse and walked slowly, making sure they could follow without feeling chased. The women moved carefully, staying close together. They didn't speak much, but every so often Jacob glanced back and saw the younger one smiling faintly at the sight of birds flying overhead. That small smile made something warm stir in him, a reminder that kindness could still exist even after hardship. It took them several hours to reach the ranch. When they arrived, Emily was outside feeding the chickens. She looked up and froze when she saw her father walking with three women she had never seen before. Her big blue eyes widened with surprise. "Papa?" she asked softly. Jacob gave her a reassuring smile. "It's all right, Emily," he said. "These ladies need a place to rest. They're friends." Emily looked at the women again. Though they were strangers, she didn't sense fear from them. Instead, she saw how tired they looked, and something in her young heart filled with sympathy. She ran inside the house and came back with a bowl of water and a loaf of bread from the kitchen. The women looked surprised by her gesture. The oldest, one on the leader among them, touched her own chest lightly and said, "Nita," as if introducing herself. She then gestured toward the other two. "Tansa," she said, pointing to the middle one, and Lena, nodding to the youngest. Emily smiled shyly and said, "I'm Emily." Nita nodded, her expression softening. There was a silence, not uncomfortable, but gentle, the kind of silence that needed no words. Jacob showed them to the barn where it was warm and dry. He brought them blankets and a small lamp. They settled quietly, whispering to one another in their own language. He could hear the faint sound of laughter, the first he imagined they had shared in a long time. That night, after Emily went to bed, Jacob sat on the porch again, staring out at the stars. He thought about the risk he had taken. People might not understand why he had brought them home. They might say he was foolish or worse. But deep down, he knew he had done the right thing. He remembered the way the young woman had smiled at the birds, the way Emily had offered bread without hesitation, and the way the older one had said her name, proud, calm, and full of dignity. These were not people to fear. They were people who had suffered enough. As the wind rustled softly through the cottonwoods, Jacob whispered to himself, "Maybe Emily doesn't just need a mother. Maybe she needs to see what kindness really means." Inside the barn, the soft glow of the lamp flickered against the walls. The women rested, safe for the first time in many days. And though Jacob didn't know what tomorrow would bring, he felt something new in the air, a quiet sense of peace, and the beginning of a bond that would change all their lives. The sun rose slowly over the horizon, lighting up the wide land in shades of gold and pink. It was the first morning after the three women came to the ranch. Jacob woke early as always. When he stepped outside, the air smelled fresh, with a touch of cool mist from the night before. The world was calm. For a few moments he stood still, listening to the sound of birds calling from the cottonwood trees. From the barn he heard soft voices. The Apache women were awake. Jacob didn't want to startle them, so he walked quietly to the well and began filling 2 buckets of water. When he reached the barn door, he paused. Inside, Nita, the oldest woman, was gently helping Lena, the youngest, comb her long dark hair. Tansa was sitting near the small lamp, mending the corner of a blanket that Emily had given them the night before. When Nita noticed Jacob, she nodded politely. He nodded back, offering the buckets. "Water," he said. "Fresh from the well." Nita smiled faintly and took 1 bucket with a small bow of her head. Her eyes were calm now, no longer full of fear, though still cautious. Jacob could see that she was a woman used to taking care of others. There was strength in her movements and something gentle in her voice when she spoke to the younger two. Emily came running out of the house, her braids bouncing. "Papa, can I bring them breakfast?" she asked eagerly. Jacob smiled. "Go ahead," he said. "But remember to be polite." A few minutes later, Emily appeared again, carrying a tray with bread, apples, and warm milk. She placed it carefully on a small wooden crate near them. The 3 women thanked her with soft smiles and gestures. Emily sat nearby, swinging her legs. "Do you like it here?" she asked them, even though she knew they might not understand. Nita looked at her kindly and said in halting English, "Good. Very good." She placed her hand over her heart. "Thank you," Emily grinned. "You're welcome." That morning, Jacob watched them from a distance as he worked on repairing a fence. He saw Emily sitting with them, pointing at things and saying their names: horse, tree, sky. The women repeated the words softly, and sometimes they laughed when they pronounced them wrong. Then they taught Emily a few Apache words in return. She listened carefully, repeating them with curiosity. It was a small, beautiful moment. Strangers turning into friends through patience and kindness. As the days passed, the women began to regain their strength. They helped around the ranch in quiet ways without being asked. Tansa was skilled with her hands. She mended old clothes and stitched up torn saddle straps with neat, careful work. Lena helped Emily gather eggs and feed the chickens. She loved to hum as she worked, her songs soft and sweet, floating through the air like wind through grass. Nita often cooked with Jacob, showing him how to use herbs and plants that grew wild nearby. Emily adored Nita. She would follow her around the ranch, asking endless questions. "How do you make that soup smell so good?" she'd ask, peeking into the pot. Nita would smile and answer with simple words, sometimes mixing English and Apache. "Patience," she'd say, tapping her spoon. "You stir slow, always slow." At night, after supper, they would all sit near the fire outside. The sky stretched above them, filled with stars. The women told stories in their soft musical language, and Emily listened with wide eyes. Even though she didn't understand every word, she could feel the meaning. Stories of rivers and mountains, of animals and courage, of family and peace. Jacob sat quietly, watching them, his hands resting on his knees. He hadn't seen Emily this happy in a long time. Her laughter was lighter now, her eyes brighter. The sound of her giggling with Lena or listening to Nita's songs filled the evenings with life. One night, as the stars shimmered above, Emily turned to her father and said, "Papa, they remind me of Mama." Jacob felt his throat tighten. He looked at the three women, their faces warm in the firelight. "Yes," he said softly. "In some ways they do." After that, the ranch felt different. It was no longer silent or lonely. The women brought with them a rhythm that changed everything. Quiet singing in the mornings, gentle laughter during chores, and peace in the evenings. Even the animals seemed calmer. The horses nickered softly when Lena came near, and the hens followed Emily and Tansa around the yard. Jacob worked hard during the days, but he felt less burdened now. He noticed that when he came home tired from the fields, there was always something waiting. A warm meal, a small smile, or a few soft words from Nita asking, "You okay?" He didn't always answer out loud, but inside he felt grateful. Still, he was careful. He knew their stay couldn't be spoken of outside the ranch. If anyone from town or the nearby farms found out he had given shelter to Apache women, they might misunderstand. People often feared what they didn't know. So he told Emily gently, "Don't talk about our guests when we go to town." She nodded, though she didn't like keeping secrets. Weeks turned into months. The land began to change color as summer deepened. The cottonwoods shimmered green in the breeze, and wildflowers bloomed along the creek. Every morning the ranch came alive with the same quiet harmony. Nita preparing breakfast, Tansa milking the cow, Lena and Emily collecting water. One afternoon, Jacob came back from fixing the far fence to find something that made him pause. Emily sat on a stool near the porch, and Lena was behind her, carefully braiding her hair. Nita and Tansa were laughing nearby, watching with affection. Emily's hair gleamed in the sunlight, and when Lena tied the last ribbon, Emily turned around proudly. "Papa, look," she said, spinning so her braids twirled in the air. Jacob smiled, his heart full. "You look beautiful," he said. Emily beamed. "Lena did it for me." Lena blushed slightly and lowered her eyes, smiling. Jacob nodded at her gratefully. "Thank you," he said quietly. Later that evening, after everyone had gone inside, Jacob sat outside again, looking at the stars. He thought about how much had changed in such a short time. He had opened his home to strangers, and somehow they had brought back something he hadn't realized was missing: joy. He remembered how afraid he had been that Emily would grow up lonely. But now she had friends. She had laughter. She had women who cared for her like a family. And he had peace. Sometimes he caught Nita looking out toward the hills, her eyes distant as if she were thinking of the people she had left behind. He didn't ask her about it, but he respected that silence. He understood what it meant to miss someone who could never return. One night, as they sat together outside, Nita turned to him and said softly, "Your daughter." "Good heart," Jacob nodded. "She's all I have." Nita smiled gently. "She has you," she said. Then after a pause, she added, "And now she has us." Those words stayed with him. They were simple, but they carried a truth he hadn't expected. The line between strangers and family had blurred, replaced by something deeper: trust. As summer drifted toward autumn, life settled into a peaceful rhythm. The women had become part of the ranch in every way that mattered. Emily called them aunties, and they laughed whenever she said it. Even the evenings had a new kind of magic. Sometimes Nita would sing softly while the others hummed along, and Jacob would close his eyes, letting the music fill the quiet spaces inside him. He no longer felt the ache of loneliness as he once did. Instead, he felt gratitude. Gratitude for the chance meeting in the canyon, for the courage to offer kindness, and for the way those three women had changed his home. But deep inside, he also knew that peace like this was fragile. The world outside their ranch still held fear and misunderstanding. He didn't know how long they could keep this secret life safe. For now, though, he chose not to worry. The stars were bright, the night air cool, and Emily's laughter echoed softly through the yard. Jacob looked toward the barn where the women slept and whispered to himself, "Maybe this is what home was always meant to feel like." The cottonwoods rustled gently in reply, as if agreeing, and under that wide New Mexico sky for the first time in years, Jacob Harlan's ranch was not a place of silence, but of peace, a place where hearts once broken had begun to heal. Autumn came gently to the land. The wide fields turned golden, and the air carried the smell of dry grass and wood smoke. The cottonwood leaves shimmered yellow in the sunlight, and the evenings grew cooler. Life on the ranch moved in a calm rhythm. Jacob, Emily, and the three women had settled into a kind of harmony that felt almost like family. Every morning, Nita would start the fire while Emily and Lena gathered water. Tansa baked bread with careful hands, humming softly as she worked. Jacob would ride out to check on the cattle, often returning to find Emily learning songs from her new friends or helping Nita grind corn for supper. The ranch felt alive, full of laughter, music, and warmth. The days were long but peaceful. Sometimes, as Jacob worked in the fields, he would stop and look toward the house. Through the open window, he could see Emily and Lena arranging flowers in a jar, their faces bright with smiles. Those moments made his heart feel light, but peace on the frontier was a fragile thing. The land carried stories of mistrust between people. Though Jacob's ranch was far from town, news still traveled, carried by travelers and traders passing through. And one chilly afternoon, as Jacob rode into Silver Creek for supplies, he heard something that made him uneasy. Inside the general store, a group of men were talking near the counter. They spoke in low voices, but Jacob caught a few words. "Apaches. Seen near the valley," one man said. "Tracks by the river. They must be hiding somewhere." Jacob's heart tightened. He kept his expression calm and continued checking the shelves, pretending not to listen. Another man spoke up, his tone sharp. "If they're hiding, someone's helping them. We can't have that. Folks need to stay alert." Jacob bought what he needed, thanked the storekeeper, and left quietly. Outside, the wind felt colder than before. He mounted his horse and rode home faster than usual, his thoughts racing. He didn't know how anyone could have seen the women, but worry gnawed at him. When he reached the ranch, the sight of Emily and the women laughing in the yard eased his heart a little, but not enough. He told Nita what he'd heard, speaking slowly so she could understand. Her face grew serious, though calm. "We be careful," she said simply. That evening after supper, Jacob sat on the porch watching the horizon darken. The sky was painted with streaks of red and purple. Emily sat beside him, holding the small beaded necklace Nita had given her weeks ago. "Papa," she said softly, "why do people not like them? They're so kind." Jacob looked at her gentle face and sighed. "Sometimes people are afraid of what they don't understand," he said. "They listen to fear instead of truth." Emily frowned. "That's not right." "No," Jacob said quietly. "It isn't." The following days passed quietly, but the air around the ranch seemed heavier. Jacob noticed riders on the far ridges. Maybe travelers, maybe not. He made sure the women stayed close to the house and out of sight whenever possible. Then one bright afternoon, the sound of hoofbeats broke the stillness. Jacob looked up from the field and saw a group of riders approaching fast. His heart thudded. He recognized the uniforms, soldiers from the nearby fort. He wiped his hands and walked to the yard, standing tall as the horses came to a stop. There were 4 men. The leader, a young lieutenant, nodded politely. "Afternoon, Mr. Harlan," he said. "We're just passing through. There have been reports of Apache women seen in this area. Thought we'd check around." Jacob kept his face steady. "Haven't seen anyone," he said evenly. "Just me, my daughter, and the cattle." The lieutenant glanced around the ranch. "Mind if we take a look around?" Jacob hesitated for only a second before answering. "You're welcome to look at the pastures," he said calmly. But there's nothing here except livestock and my home. The soldiers dismounted. Jacob's pulse quickened, but he kept his voice calm. You'll find nothing but fences and hay. Emily appeared at the doorway just then. She looked nervous, holding her small doll tightly. Jacob gave her a soft nod, and she stayed quiet. The lieutenant glanced toward the barn. We'll just have a quick look in there, he said. Jacob stepped forward slightly, his tone still polite but firm. I've got horses resting in there, he said. They're nervous around strangers. I'd rather you not disturb them. The lieutenant paused, studying Jacob's calm but steady expression. After a moment, he smiled faintly. Understood, he said. We'll just check the creek bed then. Jacob nodded. That's fine. It's dry this time of year. The soldiers rode off toward the creek. Jacob stood perfectly still, waiting until they disappeared behind the hill. Only then did he exhale. He walked quickly to the barn and opened the door. Inside, the air was thick with silence. Nita, Tansa, and Lena were hidden behind stacks of hay, their eyes wide but steady. Emily was beside them, clutching Nita's hand. Jacob gave a small nod. They're gone, he whispered. Nita placed a hand over her heart, her eyes full of quiet gratitude. Thank you, she said softly. Jacob looked around the barn, his jaw tightening slightly. It's not safe anymore, he said. They'll come back, maybe with others. You can't stay here. The words were hard to say. The ranch had grown so peaceful with them in it, and the thought of them leaving felt like losing family all over again. But he knew it was the only way to keep them safe. That night, the ranch was silent. The air felt heavy, as if the land itself knew what was coming. Jacob packed food, blankets, and water into small bundles. Emily helped quietly, her eyes glistening with tears she tried not to show. Papa, she whispered. Do they have to go? Jacob knelt beside her and brushed her hair gently. Yes, sweetheart, he said softly. It's the only way to keep them safe. She nodded, trying to be brave. Nita came over and knelt down too, placing her hands on Emily's shoulders. You strong girl, she said kindly. We remember you. Emily threw her arms around Nita and hugged her tightly. I'll miss you, she whispered. Lena handed Emily the beaded necklace she had made from small colored stones. You keep, she said in her gentle voice. For luck. When the moon rose high in the sky, Jacob saddled 3 horses quietly in the yard. The women came out, wrapped in shawls against the cool night air. The stars shimmered above, lighting their path faintly. Jacob led them toward the open land beyond the creek. The night was calm, the only sounds the soft steps of the horses and the rustle of grass. Emily walked beside her father until the edge of the pasture, then stopped. She watched as Nita turned in the saddle and waved softly. Goodbye. Emily, she said in her clear, quiet voice. Goodbye, Emily whispered back, her voice trembling. Jacob stood beside his daughter as the women rode toward the mountains, their figures growing smaller with every step. The moonlight painted their path silver, and soon they were only shadows against the hills. When they were gone, Emily turned to her father, tears glistening on her cheeks. Will we ever see them again? She asked. Jacob looked at the empty horizon and shook his head slowly. I don't know, he said honestly, but I believe they'll be safe. He placed a hand on her shoulder. We did the right thing, he said softly. Sometimes doing what's right means letting go. They stood together for a long time, the cool wind brushing against them. The ranch behind them was quiet again, the kind of quiet that felt both peaceful and sad. When they finally walked back to the house, Jacob paused at the barn door. He looked inside, the blankets neatly folded, the small lamp extinguished, the faint scent of herbs still lingering in the air. It felt empty now, but not in the same way it once did. He whispered to the shadows, "Thank you," though no one was there to hear it. That night, as Emily slept, Jacob sat on the porch watching the stars. His heart ached, but there was also a calmness deep inside him. He knew he had done what love required, the kind of love that protects quietly, without reward. The cottonwoods rustled softly, and he thought of Nita's gentle smile, Tansa's steady hands, and Lena's bright laughter. They had come into his life like a blessing he hadn't expected. And though they were gone, they had left something behind that would never fade. The next morning, when the first light of dawn touched the land, Jacob whispered the words that had started it all. My daughter needs a mother. But this time he understood something more. A mother's heart wasn't just one person. It was every act of care, every moment of kindness, every bond built out of love. And because of that, his daughter would never truly be without one again. Years passed, and the seasons moved across the land like slow, steady waves. The ranch stood strong through it all. The same wide fields, the same cottonwood trees whispering in the wind, the same sunset spreading gold over the valley. But time had changed the people who lived there. Emily grew taller, her steps lighter but her eyes wiser. She had her mother's kindness and her father's calm strength. The memories of those quiet months with Nita, Tansa, and Lena stayed with her like soft light glowing in her heart. Sometimes, when she brushed her hair in the morning, she remembered how Lena had once braided it so gently. When she cooked soup, she used Nita's way, stirring slowly and patiently. And when she sewed torn clothes or stitched a saddle strap, she did it the way Tansa had taught her, neat and strong. Though years had passed since the night they rode away, the women never left her thoughts. She often dreamed of them, their laughter, their songs, and the way their kindness had filled the house with warmth. Jacob, too, carried their memory. The ranch was quieter again, but not empty. Something of the three women lingered there, not as ghosts but as presence. In the way the wind sounded through the trees, in the small bead necklace hanging near the window, and in the peace that lived in their hearts. As Emily grew older, people in town began to notice her gentle nature and bright mind. She helped neighbors with small chores, cared for sick animals, and treated everyone she met with respect. Some said it was because she was raised well by her father. Others said there was something special in her spirit, a kindness that came from something deeper, something learned from the heart rather than words. Jacob aged too. His hair turned silver and his steps grew slower, but his spirit stayed steady. He no longer felt the loneliness that once haunted him. The memory of Sarah, his late wife, had softened with time. No longer painful, but peaceful. Sometimes in the stillness of night he thought of her and whispered softly, "You'd be proud of her, Sarah. Our girl is strong and good." One evening as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of orange and rose, Emily and Jacob sat together on the porch. The air was calm and a soft breeze carried the sound of crickets. Emily held the beaded necklace that Lena had given her so many years ago. The colors had faded a little, but it was still beautiful. "Papa," she said quietly, "do you ever think about them?" Jacob smiled, his eyes far away. "Every day," he said softly. "Not with sadness, though." With gratitude, Emily nodded. "Me too, I still remember their voices. It's strange. Sometimes when the wind blows, it feels like they're here." Jacob looked toward the cottonwoods. Their leaves shimmered gently as if nodding in agreement. "Maybe they are," he said. Years went by and Emily eventually became a woman grown. She stayed on the ranch with her father, running it with grace and skill. People in Silver Creek admired her. Some called her the heart of the valley because she was always ready to help anyone in need. When travelers passed through, she would offer them water and food. When families lost cattle or faced hard weather, she'd ride out to lend a hand. Her kindness spread across the land like sunlight after rain, and every time she helped someone, she thought of Nita's calm eyes and gentle words. "We remember you." One spring morning when the world was full of green again, a group of riders came to the ranch. They weren't soldiers, but native families passing through, moving south toward warmer lands. Emily went out to greet them as she always did with strangers. There were men, women, and children, all peaceful, their faces weathered by the road. An older woman dismounted and stepped forward. She had long silver hair and eyes that carried years of wisdom. When she saw Emily, she smiled softly, a smile that seemed to hold both recognition and peace. Emily felt her heart beat faster. She looked closely, and in that woman's face she saw something familiar. The shape of the eyes, the calm strength, the kindness that glowed even through silence. The woman stepped closer and spoke quietly. "You are Emily," she said, her voice gentle but sure. Emily nodded, her eyes wide. "Yes, how do you know my name?" The woman's smile deepened. "My mother was Nita," she said. "She told me about you, about the man who helped her and her sisters when they were lost." She said a little girl with bright eyes gave her bread and kindness. Emily's breath caught. Her eyes filled with tears. "You're her daughter?" The woman nodded. She never forgot. Before she passed, she told us to find this place someday, to thank the people who showed mercy. Jacob came out of the house, leaning slightly on his cane. When Emily told him who the woman was, his eyes grew misty. He looked up at the sky, whispering softly, "Thank you." They invited the travelers to rest. Emily brought food and water, and Jacob sat with them beneath the cottonwoods. The woman, Nita's daughter, told them stories her mother had passed down, stories of how 3 women had once found safety on a ranch when they were tired and hungry, and how that kindness had changed their hearts forever. When they left the next morning, the woman gave Emily a gift, a blanket woven with beautiful patterns of color. "My mother made this many years ago," she said. "She said it was for the girl who showed her what family means." Emily held the blanket against her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'll take care of it." As the riders disappeared into the horizon, Jacob and Emily stood together, silent and full of emotion. The world seemed brighter, as if the land itself remembered the goodness that had once passed between strangers. From that day on, the blanket hung in their home, beside the beaded necklace. It became part of their story, a story not written in books but carried in hearts. Years later, after Jacob passed peacefully in his sleep, Emily continued to live on the ranch. She grew older, but her spirit stayed young. Children from nearby farms often visited her, sitting by her porch as she told them stories of the old days, stories of her father, of her mother she never knew, and of 3 brave women who once brought light into their lives. She never spoke of sadness. Her stories were about hope, about how kindness can change lives in quiet, unseen ways. When she talked about the rancher who took a chance to help strangers, her eyes always softened and she would say, "My father taught me that true strength isn't in fighting or shouting. It's in kindness that asks for nothing in return." The children listened wide-eyed, holding on to every word. When the evenings grew cool, Emily would sit alone on the porch wrapped in the woven blanket. She'd watch the sky turn golden, the same way it had when she was little. Sometimes she thought she could hear faint laughter carried on the wind, the voices of Nita, Tansa, and Lena, singing softly in the distance. And in those moments, she felt no loneliness at all. The world felt full of love that had crossed boundaries, full of memories that would never fade. The years eventually folded into one another, and Emily's story became part of local memory. Travelers who passed through the valley heard tales of the kind rancher and his daughter, and how they had once helped 3 women in need. Some said it was just a legend, but those who knew the land, who felt the peace that lived around the old Harlan Ranch, believed it was all true. Long after Emily was gone, the house still stood beneath the cottonwoods. The necklace still hung by the window and the blanket still rested on the old wooden chair. And when the wind moved through the trees, it sounded like whispers of gratitude and a soft, timeless echo of love and mercy. People who came there said the place felt different, like it carried peace in its very soil. Because once, a man had listened to his heart and chosen kindness. Because once a girl had shared her bread and her smile.
And because once 3 women had turned strangers into family. Their story lived on, not just in words, but in the quiet truth that goodness once given never truly fades.